Good morning. You're all very welcome. My name is Jules Gilson. I'm Professor of Creative Practice here at University College Cork in Ireland, and I'm also head of the School of Film, Music and Theatre. This is Visioning the Future, Artistic Doctorates in Ireland, our online seminar series. And we're welcoming you here this morning on the 20th of August after a very wild night of storms here in Ireland. So I hope everyone is safe and well. And please forgive us if we have any internet problems because of the wind and outages and so forth. So this morning, we're very excited to welcome Michaela Glanz to give a presentation on supervising artistic research doctorates. So Michaela Glanz is head of the Art, Research and Support Department at the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, where she supports and advises arts-based researchers, artists and scientists on project funding and related issues. Michaela is also head of the management board of the Centre for Knowledge Transfer East, and this is a regional cooperation network which includes all 9 Viennese universities, and the Academy of the Fine Arts is the lead partner for the fields of art, art-based research, social sciences and humanities. Michaela was trained as a sociologist and an economist, and her expertise focuses on the fields of higher education research, social studies of sciences, and organisational studies, as well as questions and methods related to evaluation and impact studies. So we're very excited to welcome Michaela to speak with us this morning and to answer your questions. In particular, Michaela is going to be talking about her Erasmus Plus project, which she's closely involved with, which is a 3-year strategic partnership project running from 2018 to 2021 called Advancing Supervision for Artistic Research Doctorates. And the project partners are the Academy of Fine Arts Vienna, who is the coordinator, the Academy of Fine Arts in Prague, the European League of the Institutes of the Arts, ELIA, in the Netherlands, the Orpheus Institute Ghent, the School of Architecture in Scotland, the University of Art and Design in Linz, Austria, the University of Bergen in Norway, and Zurich University of the Arts in Switzerland. And Andrea Bright, who gave a fantastic presentation for this seminar series on artistic research doctorates in film, is on the advisory board. So there's a really interesting connection between visitors for this online seminar series and really important developing thinking and research and practice within Europe. So without further ado, I'll pass over to my colleague here and Michaela and for her presentation. Thank you, Michaela.
Thank you, Jules, for this invitation and for the nice introduction. And your very kind words. So what I'm going today is to talk about supervising artistic research doctorates, and I'm doing this on the basis of some slides I've prepared, and I will quickly run through with you all. So I'm sharing my screen with you now and start the presentation. So I hope you can see it. So as already introduced, I will mainly talk, or was invited to talk, about the Advancing Supervision for Artistic Research Doctorates project and give you a kind of an input and food for thought for addressing the issue of how to supervise artistic research PhDs. Today's input will be, of course, about the project as such. I won't go into much detail, but just offer to you the opportunity to then, if you're interested after the talk or after any other kind of event we are offering, that you know what we are doing and that you have the opportunity to contact us and get in dialogue with us. I think one important starting point to think about supervision is to talk about concepts, principles, instruments, and formats. I will present some. Because of the limited time, I will just quickly trigger something, and I'm happy to go into more detail in the section after the presentation. And of course, examples and best practices are always important. I'll try to give you some here. This is not a linear kind of agenda. It will be somehow interwoven, and I hope you can work with that. About the project, Jules already mentioned a lot of information, so it's left to me to give you an idea about the motivation and the context of the project. As you have already heard a presentation from Andrea Bright, for sure you have learned about the Florence principles on the doctorates in the arts. This is the basis or the starting point from where we started to think about the Advancing Supervision project. Supervision is a core issue for any good practice in doctoral education. We all know that. And there are a number of recommendations in the Florence principles. For example, a doctoral agreement that focus that there are different supervision roles, which means a triangulation of the supervision relationship, that it is a process where we have to be very sensible about the different phases and the different rights and duties of all parties. You can reread that in the Florence principles on page 8. So coming from this motivation and from this starting point, we thought it's worthwhile to go into a strategic partnership project, which is funded within the Erasmus Plus program, because this offers quite a lot of good actions that are needed in order to see what exists already out there. And we all know a lot of things are happening out there. We are aiming to share practices. We are aiming to develop something that is useful and can be translated into each individual institutional as well as PhD relationship. It's a 3-year project, has already been mentioned, as well as the 9 partners that are involved. What are we dealing with in the project? The project design foresees 3 phases, which we have found out beforehand. So we need to talk about the framework, we need to set the framework, then we need to talk about the actors, what are their distinguished roles, competencies, etc. And then it's all about improving the practices with different foci points that are to be found in the work packages that we designed. All in all, and our aim is to, in the end, come up with a non-normative guide on key issues related to supervising artistic research doctorates. We think we will call it an Undoing Supervision guide, non-normative guide. Why is this non-normative so important? It's not about setting benchmarks or fixed standards. It's about valuing the differences and the different needs and practices, and offering an opportunity that each, both individual supervisor, individual PhD candidate, each institution can pick out what is needed in their very concrete supervision setting and framework, and adapt the tools that we want to offer to your very own contexts. I also want to advertise the upcoming multiplier events, which are 2. The Doctoral Supervisor Seminar taking place in November in Ghent, hopefully in person. We will see where we end up. Which is about feedback and feed forward. And of course, the final conference, Advancing Supervision for Artistic Research Doctorates and Beyond, that will take place in Vienna in June next year. So where to start off? How to think about supervision? It is quite clear we need to address 3 groups of people. It's all about triangulating the process and the procedure. When talking about supervising, and that's also something I really want to point out, I rather tend to talk about supervision as the whole triangular setting we are facing, instead of supervising, which tends to implement a kind of a different relationship also with this directional approach. So it's a multi-directional triangular relationship and not a one-way approach. So the groups are the PhD candidates, of course, the PhD supervisors, of course, but also the institutional actors, university leaders and administration. What we see is that there's a tendency to see this kind of institutional actors as a kind of additional bureaucracy, additional burden where everybody has to deal with, but that doesn't make any sense. We strongly argue against this, because if you consider the relationship in a real triangular relationship, all three partners have their distinct roles and support a good supervision setting. Another thing that is quite obvious is that it is a process with distinct phases, with different needs and expectations on the way. There's a life cycle of PhDs. Whether a PhD project is at the very beginning or in the middle or towards the end, it really makes a difference with respect to the relationship in supervision, with respect to the needs and the expectations of all three parties involved. And it's also a process with different notions, dimensions, practices of supervision. While it is called supervision all over the world, I would say, in fact, sometimes it's rather mentoring, sometimes it's rather coaching, or in some settings, it's the notion of teaching that is more prominent. So I think that's really important to distinguish these different notions and definitions of what it is about. It also considers the dimensions of to teach, to coach, to think through art. We are talking about artistic research doctorates and to institutionalize. Why am I picking out these four dimensions? I want to show you one of our results out of the project, which is the work package 1 about setting the framework, advancing supervision mind map that has been developed under the lead of Academy of Fine Arts in Prague. What I'm showing you here before I go to the final output, which is an online interactive tool, is the paper version of what we were working with throughout the process of the project. So what do you see here? We started from the term to supervise and then collected throughout the whole procedure with different institutions, with different peoples, with different groups of peoples involved, a number of terms that set up a kind of world of supervision. And then this paper was used to sit together around the table to start off discussions, to talk what is meant by supervision, in what concrete setting, what is not needed maybe, and how terms are related. So this is a kind of a mind mapping exercise that finally resulted into, and now I'm switching to the online tool, the online advancing supervision mind map. So what you see here is that we started off from to supervise. We connected that in a kind of first results to the four terms I already mentioned: to coach, to think through art, to teach, and to institutionalize. This was the starting point, and I will show you now some of the workshop results to explain where we wanted to go and take out the example of to teach. So you see also how it nicely moves and works with this online format. And here I just to pick out one of the terms we were discussing about is the example for to reality check. Supervising PhD candidates means to check whether a project is doable, to do the reality check. What does this mean for different parties involved? For some people involved, it means to have a real impact in the outside world. So this is about clarifying expectations of what your PhD work is all about. Then to be updated in a changing world, to also to know the context, not to work without considering the context. Also to peer supervise. Somebody has to check whether you your project is within the disciplinary community-based knowledge that is already around. And to reality check also means to go outside. So while I guess that some of these terms and notions would not pop up at the very beginning when you start thinking and talking about supervising, I really think that this exercise within our project showed that it is such a complex situation and relationship we are acting in, that our offer is that this kind of approach, method, and also tool can be used to really check and to agree on what is important for your very own context. Feel invited to the website is a public website. Feel invited to try it out yourself, and also to think about how you can use or want to use these kind of approach in your own settings. Coming back to the presentation. Another instrument I would like to present is the PhD Supervision Agreement, which sometimes is called Doctoral Agreement or something like that, and which is also recommended in the Florence Principles. What is it? It's an agreement between all three parties. It's signed by all three parties. By three parties, I again mean PhD candidate, supervisor, or supervisors, depending on the model of supervision you are having, and also the institutional players. What is it for? Of course, it's to clarify expectations, to exemplify commitment and motivation, and also, as mentioned before, to ensure the doability of the PhD project. And here it is really important, again, it's not a one model fits all. You always have to, or are asked to, consider within agreed time and available resources. Having a look into Europe and the PhD programs in artistic research that are around, we see that there are many different frameworks that really impact on how a PhD project is set up and how a PhD supervision agreement can be formulated and is formulated. Of course, and in particular from the institution side, it's also an instrument to check the fit of the PhD project with the PhD program, as well as the PhD candidate and supervisor link, relationship and match. It's aiming at agreeing on rights and duties of all parties involved, responsibilities, and I'm mentioning it, standards. This does not mean it's in one model fits all standard, but a standard that is agreed upon those parties that are involved in this very specific PhD project. And it also means to prevent conflicts, because when you clarify expectations beforehand, that does not mean that everything has to be done 100% as it is or as it has been written down at the very beginning. But there's a starting point where you can adapt, where you can add on things, where you can change things. And it helps to structure the procedure and also the communication between all the three parties involved. As already said, the instrument exists at many places. It's used very differently by institutions and also in the individual practice, because what we see is that sometimes at institutional level you have quite detailed instructions how to write it and fill it out, but it's really about the individual practice in the individual PhD supervision relationship that counts in the end. You have different models of supervision, that's very clear. So Be aware and reflect on also, again, from all three parties involved, who are your supervisors in artistic research PhD programs? Is it artists? Is it humanities scholars? Is it maybe also scientists? Is it artistic researchers? Is it a mix of these groups of people? This is not only important from the perspective of the institution, who of course has to see who can supervise in what kind of PhD program, but it's also important for you as the PhD candidates to see who is my supervisor, what can I expect from him or from her, and you have to talk about it. Also, what are the models of supervision? We hope that there's not that much one-on-one supervision out there, but it still exists. And I have to admit, it's okay in certain phases of a PhD life cycle. You also see supervisor, co-supervisor teams, or you find team supervision where a number of people are involved. But again, this is not the standard model that needs to be fulfilled through the whole life cycle. So our impression is, or also recommendation is, to really think about what kind of hybrid is needed along the way in this individual PhD project-related supervision relationship. Formats for supervision, we all experience that there's a need for individual appointments, group meetings, colloquia, PhD classes. A lot of formats are out there. The question is, how are these defined? We sometimes see that some institutions have quite clear curricula where it is strictly regulated what needs to be done in what amount and in what time frame. But again, it's the individual practice. And the question is it defined by each PhD project's needs? Because that would be an option when you discuss the expectations, the tasks, the responsibilities and needs, when you agree on the PhD supervision agreement, the doctoral agreement, then you can define that. What do I as a PhD candidate concretely need? Yeah. What do I expect from my PhD supervisor? What do I also expect from my institution? Bringing me to the last point, the institutional frame and environment is very important. And here we really have to be clear, what are we also able to offer? Not only what do we want to offer? Because what we see is that sometimes expectations at the very beginning are quite high from the side of the PhD candidates. And in different national contexts, you find different abilities and different environments for PhD candidates. It makes a difference whether you're a paid PhD candidate or whether you have to take care for your own money. And there are different formats of how to organize it in graduate schools, PhD programs. What I would like to kind of throw into the discussion as a quite powerful practice, where we also at the Academy have very good experience with, is the peer group supervision. What is peer group supervision? It's intended to provide an informal and collegial assistance and support with any kind of PhD concerns. So this means it offers the level of consultation, peer consultation, with respect to the very topic of a PhD project, content-wise, meaning on the level of research questions, methods, artistic practice, also theoretical framing, whatever is needed with the individual PhD project. But, and that's also important, it also works as a support beyond this topic level and content level, which we experience is very important when you are doing a 3 years or 4 years PhD study. And this is important and is the difference compared to the relationship between the supervisor and the PhD candidate. It's characterized by absence of formal authority. However, and that's the second point that is important, it needs to be empowered by formal authority. That this is something that is part of the supervision process. And of course, it also needs a skilled facilitator. So much about what it should be in theory. The example I want to give is what we in our PhD and practice program at the Academy of Fine Arts developed as a format. It's called the slot machine, which is an ironic title referring to a lottery machine and the functioning of a lottery machine, which means that there is no fully controlled process, but some kind of settings and controls that it in principle works. But what in the end happens is due to luck. We developed this in a kind of an empowering format for progress reporting, which might now appear like contradicting this kind of luck and absence of formal authority aspects. But it was a kind of a try to somehow escape from this PhD candidates are presenting according to a pre-defined and expected structure where they stand and what still needs to be done, as I did at the very beginning with the presentation of the Advancing Supervision project design, but to give the opportunity to just throw in something where at this very moment you expect some kind of input. And by doing so, you show where you're working on and what the kind of progress is you are now presenting. So it's a setting where a group of PhD candidates meet at a certain point in time, and they do this presentation. And for the facilitator, that is also important, we decided to invite friendly critiques from outside. So it's not the supervisor or the supervisor's team that are in the formal authority. This is something that irritates people when they're doing it the first time, and I think this is also really important, PhD candidates have fun with it. And I think with all these kind of regulations, frameworks, expectations, responsibilities, tasks and duties, we should not forget about the probably most important thing about artistic research. You should be empathetic with it and should make fun and sense. So as I'm having a look at the time, this was what I wanted to throw in as a first input for the further discussion and for moving on within this online seminar. I again advertise the two seminars that are still upcoming, the events. The feedback feed forward call will be opened for participation, will be open soon. So if you're interested, please register at the website to get more information and hopefully also to participate at this supervisors seminar. If you're interested in more information or if you want to get in contact, on the left-hand side you find my personal contact details. If you want to learn more or get information about the Advancing Supervision project, you either might write an email, ask whatever you want to ask, or register for the project update at the advancingsupervision.eu website. So, for the moment, I think that's it from my side.
Thank you, Michaela. That was that was wonderful. On a morning when all cobwebs in Ireland have been blown away, it was really glorious to see your gorgeous image of the mind mapping, a really intelligent and lively mapping. Is that the website version of that? Is that on your website, or is that still in development?
No, it's on the website within the output section. You find the link to this. What is still in development is that the overall idea is that we want to invite colleagues to further contribute and to further develop the mind map, that it is still growing and further developing. Yeah.
It's a really compelling tool, and it's I was really struck by what we can learn from that as we go forward and develop our open educational resources, particularly around having resources that map a kind of range of experiences, but also allow for difference and the different kinds of differences between disciplines and institutions. Mm-hmm. So thank you for that. I had just one question before we pass over to Ines. The last two things that you described, which were very really interesting, your peer group supervision and also your slot machine. I was interested in how the specificities of the artistic research PhD map onto those. Like from your experience, what is it specifically about the artistic research doctorate that makes those kinds of formats particularly compelling? Or do you think that actually those are structures that could be mapped onto more traditionally structured PhDs?
Maybe I answer from the perspective of why we saw the need to develop the slot machine. It was exactly because with this former traditional kind of presentation formats, it didn't work out. It was okay for some dimensions and for some discussions, but yeah, we missed the more artistic, the more experimental approach. And it's also kind of a tendency that when the supervisor is in the room, you mirror the expectations into your own presentation. And this gives you some free space and without this pressure that is put because of this formal authority relationship. And what we see is we have artistic interventions where you really think about, it really triggers something if you invent yourself what you want to present to a specific audience, not knowing who the audience is and what you in the end get out. And I really think that triggers something, and that is something that is possible, especially within the artistic research PhDs.
Yeah. It's really welcome to hear you say that, because I do think strategies of playfulness and humor and fun or alternative ways of thinking are really critical and are forms of intelligence that sometimes we forget in our formal structures. Okay, I'm going to pass over to Ines. Before I do so, just to explain that what we're going to do today is we're going to do something slightly different, and we're going to use some Padlet technology because to allow us to hear from you, our invisible audience, a bit more directly, and to help us then to feed that back in terms of questions for Michaela. So I'm going to pass over to Ines now.
Thank you, Jules. Thank you, Michaela, for a wonderful presentation. So today we would like to look at our collective experiences and concerns relating supervision. I'm going to share a link on the chat. So here you are. So if you could all click on that link and open it on your browser, you can copy paste it as well. And at the same time, I will share my screen. So if you have any difficulties accessing the Padlet, you can see it here. So let's try this sharing. Can everyone see my Padlet, I suppose? Okay, so I would like to give you a couple of minutes to think through and reflect what Michaela has been sharing with us, and also how that relates to your own experiences. And if you can share some thoughts in a neutral way, not specifying any references, but mostly we want to collect a summary of key issues. We have 5 columns here. So I see that someone is already typing. So in column 1, staff challenges, what challenges have you encountered in terms of supervising artistic research PhDs? Column 2 is a question for students. Have you faced any challenges, particularly in relating to praxis? On column 3, we would like you to think about what helpful practices have you encountered throughout your experiences, is there anything that resonated? And finally, if you have any thoughts in terms of support or training, Michaela had shared some great resources with us today. Vida Midgelos also shared some examples last week, but perhaps you also have some thoughts on that. If you would like to share your reflections, you can write them there. Any questions from the audience, we'll be taking them a little bit towards the end. So on column 5, you can write up any questions or comments that you might have for Michaela. So you just click on the plus sign, you can ignore the title, and you can write something example. I'll give you a couple of minutes. We're not used to having silence in these online webinars, but we'll have 1 or 2 minutes of silence so that you can reflect and type in what you would like to share. Thank you. Well, I'll be back in 1 minute. Thank you all. If you have already written a reflection and are not sure what else to add, I invite you to now look at what your colleagues have written, and then if there's something you would like to write a response, you can, for example, add a comment and type in your response. So I invite you now to see through what the landscape of reflections is and write your own responses. And then we'll invite Michaela back in the room for a discussion. We'll have a minute or 2 to do that. Okay, I think we'll keep this open as we move forward. So if you have any questions or reflection, that you can write them up as they come up. Michaela, I would like to invite you back. Let's focus on the first section in terms of considering staff challenges. And we've got a couple of reflections here in terms of working with supervisors that do not have an artistic research background and how that might influence the project and create difficulties. And also there's some reflection on the lack of resources and how to find good supervisors that complement the competences to create the ability to work as a group. So that relates to what you were saying earlier about thinking about the supervision team. Can you tell us more about that?
In fact, I was quickly reading through these comments, and I recognize a lot of them. So it's nothing where I can offer solutions, but add some more thoughts on that. With respect to the competences, what is an artistic research PhD doing if his or her supervisors are not holding artistic research competences? I think that's something we are facing quite often because artistic research as such is quite a new discipline, and there are not that many people around that hold formalized artistic research kind of experience. But I think what we have to do is to free us from this kind of thinking. Each kind of competence may make a sense, but you have to clarify what kind of competences in what kind of life cycle for what kind of phase of your PhD. So for example, in our PhD in practice, this still is a scholarly PhD program because that was the framework that was set by law when we set it up. So there is a need for a scholarly co-supervisor. And the question is, in what kind of phases, with what kind of support can this person help? So it's not about complaining that he or she does not hold an artistic practice or is not in artistic practice himself or herself, but to see what he or she can contribute. And when it is about writing, of course, there are several competences then fit together with the team. So I think the crucial thing is really to think about a team and to clarify these expectations and make clear what it is all about. The worst thing we experience is that we have, and I'm very honest with you, that we have PhD supervisors who are only working in theory and who would love to be close to artistic research and artistic practice. And if PhD candidates at the very beginning do not see that, that really causes troubles on the way. Yeah. So if it's clear from the very beginning, it can be solved.
Yeah, thank you. I think that takes us to the next column in terms of challenges for students. And there's some notes in terms of negotiating how the institution works, but also the lack of examples that are available in terms of similar projects, because artistic research is still quite new in several institutions. And I guess there is a question here in terms of how to negotiate something that is quite new within the institutional boundaries, when those institutional boundaries are also quite unclear. If you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think the key to success is that you involve the institution. So not just say these are the boundaries set by the institution, but really do boundary work, because boundaries can be shifted. I think this happens, yeah, it's a kind of a partnership and agreement within what we call this triangular setting. If you take this seriously, then I think this is a solution out of that.
Thank you. And thinking about helpful practices, you offer today quite some strong examples, the PhD agreement, the student support. I was wondering if you could tell us more about how the student support, the peer group works. Would that be, is that organized by the students? Do they invite an outside facilitator? Whether you could share some more thoughts in terms of helpful practices for supervision in that regard.
Mm-hmm. I think a key issue, in fact, is, as you are saying, that the PhD candidates organize it themselves. But there is this empowerment from the institution side and from the supervisor side by offering sufficient resources to do so. You need money to invite a critical friend to facilitate this kind of thing. So it's more than just saying the students should meet somewhere in the cafeteria and talk about whatever is important. So this is what we think is important and necessary to make it happen. Because PhD candidates, yes, they meet, they talk to each other, they make use of their peer group and of their cohort, but it needs to be integrated in the standard supervision process. And that's something different compared to just PhD candidates doing it.
Thank you, Michaela. I will pass on now to Jules. You'd like to add something?
Yes, I just wanted to add something to that, which is within our context within Ireland, one of the, because what you're speaking to there is the critical importance of the artistic research doctoral student community and the ability therefore to kind of have these kind of informal modes where you can show work in progress, you can be playful about how you show, how you have things that are beside more formal processes and what a critical importance they are. And I'm just wondering, as you're speaking there, that one of the challenges we sometimes have within Ireland is that there might only be, within a particular department, there might only be maybe 1 or 2 artistic research students, or maybe 4 or 5. So it may be that we need to be more, some institutions have more, absolutely, but it may be that the process of bringing PhD, artistic research PhD students together to try to do these kinds of informal feedback with each other might be more necessary. And I just wondered if you had any experience of that in the work that you've been doing.
In fact, our PhD in practice is quite big. We have 30 to 35 PhD candidates around in the program. And it's really kind of cohorts that are set up and work together. But in fact, at the very beginning, we started with a cooperational format where we invited another arts university from Linz to do this kind of exercise together with us. This is also important because it opens up your own formal structures, because when you meet with others, you tend to talk about what is possible within the formal structures and whatnot. But you are forced to overcome this and to make things happen. And that was really a good experience. And I know it also from other countries that PhD colloquia or symposia are made across institutional settings.
Thank you. I'll pass back to Ines.
Thank you. Moving on to thinking of support and training for staff, I see there's some notes and reflections here in terms of supervising the supervisors. So how can supervisors support each other within the institution? You already touched a little bit on that, but I was wondering if there's anything else you'd like to add, Michaela.
We tried to set up something comparable to the peer group supervision setting that I was explaining beforehand. And to be honest, it didn't work out. Supervisors tend or don't want to be supervised, be it the institution, be it the peers. So whoever has a good idea, I'm happy to hear about it. We did not manage to go beyond this formal kind of training and workshop setting where people just attend because they have to attend and then complain about it. So it's a difficult issue, to be honest.
I wonder if there's something here also related to overworking, having many projects on one's plate, and then it just becomes another plate to juggle, which adds extra challenges for supervisors. Just checking if there's anything else that Jules or Michaela you'd like to touch upon before I move on to questions from the audience. Jules?
Yeah, no, just on that, I think it's really interesting, and thank you for being so honest with us about that challenge, because the role of being a PhD supervisor, it has that kind of aura of authority and expertise. And it was really interesting in the presentation we had a couple of weeks ago from Vida Midgelo, who did another Erasmus Plus project on dance and movement artistic research PhDs. And she was talking about different kinds of models, such as witnessing or this kind of co-collaboration. And I'm really interested in the potential for exploring that, like what does it mean to be a supervisor, and the whole power politics related to that. So, but yeah, I'll pass back, Ines.
Thank you, Jules. I need to move things around in my screen so that I can see the questions from the audience. There is a question about articulating this notion of thinking through art, and under what circumstances that articulation has to be intermediate, verbal, textual, other forms of communication. I'm not sure what the question is. Let me read it again. I guess the question is about in what perspective might we use this notion of thinking through art? How can we think through art, particularly also in a supervisory setting as well?
Mm-hmm. I think what you were quoting beforehand is probably already part of the answer. So what we found, this was just a notion or a wording, a phrase that was brought into from participants in the workshop who said, come on, we're talking about artistic research doctorates. Of course, we have to think through art. And what we found out is that, again, this means something different in different phases and for different people and for different projects. What has been made clear is to think through art also means to make art. So it's not only about talking about art, but also to make art and to translate and articulate, to verbalize, to self-respect, etc. And if you're interested in this question of how to give feedback on a piece of art through means of art and through thinking of art, I would really recommend to participate in the feedback multiplier event in November, because that's the very topic of this event then.
Thank you. I'll pass over to Jules. Thank you.
Thank you, Ines. Michaela, it's just been so tantalizing having you come and open what is such a rich field of questions about how we think through art with these artistic research PhDs. And that final question, it feels to me at the heart of what we're trying to do when we are engaged with artistic research PhDs, which is valuing the intelligence of other modes of thinking beyond the critical and analytical. And that process of respecting and relishing and developing and counterpointing both the intelligence of art practices and thinking through art with the theoretical and the critical, I think is at the heart of the artistic research PhD inquiry that you're involved in and we're involved in. So I want to thank you very much for coming to us today. I know the seminar here is short, but they're also intended to allow our audiences and us to connect with the kinds of research projects and the kinds of events that you have upcoming in November and then next June, which is very welcome because our research project is brief. It's just a year, and we are hoping that it will be something that we can step off and develop further. So thank you also Ines, and behind the scenes Michael Ryan, who is helping us with all the technical side of things, and also the audience today. We really appreciate you taking part in the Padlet exercise, and it's really exciting actually to use a different format and to explore different ways of doing these online seminars, and it's really wonderful to get a sense of you being there because we don't see you. So just to say at the end then, we have Ines will put a link in the chat, which is we need to, as part of our research, we need interviewees, staff and students who are involved in the artistic research PhDs. And if you're interested in being involved with these interviews with Ines, we'd really welcome that. And also next week, our session is on the artistic research PhD examination. And myself and Yvonne Bonenfant will be exploring that with you. So we'd really love you to come next week, again at 11 o'clock. And hopefully the sun will be shining then, wherever you are. Thank you. Bye-bye.